presentation I will talk about the terminology server we have in the Netherlands and also the governance we have set up. But first of all, let me start by introducing myself. I'm Chantal Schiltmeijer, currently working as a technical implementation advisor, terminology at NICTIZ. But before that, I was a registered nurse for 21 years and saw dialysis wards and neonatal NICUs. But I liked the information technology better, so I retrained myself and now I'm working at NICTIZ. But enough about me. Let's get back to today's topic. First of all, let me give you a super quick crash course on healthcare in the Netherlands. We have about 17 million people and we spend about 10% of our income on healthcare, which equals 70 billion euros a year. So you could say healthcare is a big part of our economy. Research has shown that we have a high quality healthcare. Even though the costs are relatively high, we are among the front runners in the group. OECD yearly reports that, but still by far behind the US. Within the Netherlands, we have a dispersed organizational structure, which creates problems in steering sometimes. However, having local power, on the other hand, gives us some flexibility and speed. There is some evidence that our well-organized primary care, especially the GPs, contribute a lot to the quality. In the Netherlands, we don't have a national health service. Everyone is required to purchase basic health insurance and is free to choose their own insurer. And these health insurers are required to accept these private individuals under their policy, irrespective to their health condition. This system is also based on solidarity. So premiums for policies are offered are equal for all policyholders, regardless of their health, age, or background. The health insurers also have a duty of care. They must guarantee that healthcare is available in the basic package for all their policyholders. And the contents of that basic package is provided under law. And the healthcare providers in the Netherlands are basically all private entrepreneurs. And all the data infrastructure is privately operated. Mostly non-profit, but also mostly regional and categorical. There is no national health information infrastructure. All in all, this is quite a complex environment. And in the Netherlands, we see that different standards are being used in different settings. Needs differ depending on the setting the clinicians are in. But in order to keep this workflow viable, mappings between these standards are needed to enable interoperability. And this is equally important for the patient, who will be able to see all this data in his own PHR. And having all these different standards can be challenging. Currently, there isn't a governance specified on the health information infrastructure level. But for terminology, this governance is quite clear. If we look at the governance on an international level, take SNOMED CT, for instance, we see that SNOMED CT is the purse bearer and sets the financial framework. As they are also the holder, they are responsible for developing and maintaining their standards, as where the authorizing authority adopts the standard. Further along the road, you see when SNOMED distributes their standards, we take over as NICTIZ because we are also an NRC, a National Release Center. So we proceed distributing this on a national level. So when we look at the governance on a national level, we see that the Ministry of Health is the purse bearer and sets the financial framework. And in this diagram, you can see that the role of the holder is being shared between us and the Ministry of Health. And in this case, we are ultimately responsible for developing and maintaining the standard. Let's take SNOMED, for instance. We provide the translations and the mappings. Those are good examples of what we do with the standards. And this governance applies to all terminology used in the Netherlands. LOINC works basically the same way. The functional manager and the technical administrator are responsible for the process of development, and that the technical management proceeds according to the agreements we have set with the Ministry of Health. And we also distribute it on a national level, but I will come back to that in later slides. In addition to the previous slides, as a holder of these standards, besides maintaining and developing, we also take part in a qualification and certification. Our qualification center makes sure vendors and licensees uphold their end. Through a qualification and certification process, we check to see if the field or independent vendors comply with the requirements that we have set. And these requirements are set in consultation with stakeholders and the Ministry of Health. But it's eventually up to the field to maintain these standards after the qualification and implementation process. The field also needs to incorporate standards and implement them in future builds, but also in past builds. And we would like them to choose freely between all the different national standards we have in the Netherlands. But proper mapping, as Constantine also said, should be done to ensure the interoperability. I'm going to take a small sidestep. The Electronic Data Exchange in Healthcare Bill, the WEGIS, makes it possible to designate data exchanges between healthcare providers. That will in the future, and in any case, be mandatory electronically, which is similar to the EHTS, the European Health Data Space. The WEGIS, this bill hasn't been passed yet, but we look ahead and we want to be prepared. So we help and okay, sorry. The WEGIS also focuses on 4 interoperability topics, including the medications, so the e-prescriptions, the discharge letters for nurses, imagings like x-rays and laboratory findings also, and a basic data set for healthcare, which contains a set of resources that is needed to inform clinicians, like patient information, unknown allergies, etc. We at NICTIZ also have an international team that looks out for strides in development within Europe and beyond. We strive to match those strides because interoperability needs to reach an international level in the foreseeable future. Within the Netherlands, we also have the VIP program, which was initiated by our government. It's a program we contributed to by developing a framework for the use of standards and information models. That being said, there are still big issues with terminology. We have come a long way. I mean, 8 years ago, for instance, was the last time we released SNOMED via DVD. But there are still dozens of code systems, hundreds of value sets and information models. And there's little to no overlap in release format or in release planning. There are many different vendors, small or big, and many new PHR vendors. But we could say everybody needs it. So how did we tackle this in the Netherlands? We started with a national terminology server, which enables software vendors and data scientists to keep up with the latest terminology. This is a FHIR compliant solution, which can be called upon through our REST API. And our ambition is to provide all terminologies and classifications used in the Netherlands, while respecting licenses. To decrease the implementation threshold by decreasing the complexity of implementing smart capabilities of terminology like post-coordination, mapping, and translations. And we do this free of charge. To summarize the content, the current content of the terminology server, I added this slide. The national terminology server, which currently has over a little 100 active users, including some big vendors, and it still keeps increasing monthly. Also, the art decor is one of the things Constantine showed. We also make that available. But why did we choose for a terminology server? When we look at the current landscape, we have multiple standards which need their own transformation and have their own release dates. And transforming them into a common data model can be a time-consuming process for every vendor. So why not transform it to a FHIR model, after which vendors can do their own local transformation. We advise them to set up their own local copy of our server by creating their own instance, which is fed by information from our terminology server. They can maintain and update their own server and guarantee uptime, which we at NICTIZ don't provide. Basically, we strive to create an ecosystem of servers, which feed off each other's information, filling itself with all the latest standards. But wouldn't this ecosystem benefit of having just one more server? We hope that the future might bring us a European terminology server, which is fed by standards like SNOMED and LOINC, for instance. This would be an ideal way to fill local servers like the one we have in the Netherlands, and probably others in other countries in Europe. For terminology, the governance is quite clear. For bigger standards, it might not be. Keeping up to date with terminology releases is hard, and we like to help, so we developed the terminology server. And using a standard like FHIR enables interoperability, not just for patient data, but also for terminology products. The NTS, the National Terminology Server, is free if you already own a license for the terminology that's in there.
So what is the percentage of resources you've been allocating, or the amount of resource you allocate to this objective in NICTIZ?
Yeah, what I basically said is we like to do all the standards we have in the Netherlands. And this is something we discuss with the Ministry of Health because we need money to make sure everything is available. Yeah, and it's also something we discuss with our stakeholders, where the need is the most. So we prioritize that, yeah, depending on what the stakeholders want also.
Okay, and maybe a second question is that we spoke about the referencement of the resources and the mapping, the cross mapping, of course, of those resources, which is one thing. But we've seen that, for example, to use SNOMED, you still need to have translations available, which is also a big part of the investment needed, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you share, for example, with Belgium a language.
Yeah,
and
we do.
so as it's a huge investment, is this something you do in cooperation with other countries, or how have you organized this work?
What we did with Belgium, for instance, is we have a set of Dutch translations, and we just share because it's for interoperability purposes. We need to share with each other, and they cannot take all the translations because there are certain language kinks I might say. Um, but we talk about that once every 2 months, I think, with Belgium to see, and we help each other. If they find something we did wrong, we correct it, and vice versa.
Thank you, Chantal.